adjusting to this virtual tech world. So
Right.
sorry about that. Thank you all for your patience, and thank you all for being here. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll be quiet and let Regina take it away to introduce the two of our great guests here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the Homelessness, Public Health, and the Law CLE. So I'll go ahead and introduce our guests. First, I would like to thank Ms. Stephanie Truong for joining us today. Stephanie is the Program Director and Managing Attorney of Beacon Law, a program of the Beacon. The Beacon is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing essential and next step services to individuals who are homeless or indigent in order to restore hope and end homelessness in Houston. Previously, Stephanie was an assistant county attorney at the Harris County's office in the Protective Services Division. And she realized that there were many gaps in the foster care system, especially for youth aging out of care. So she applied and was awarded a 2-year Equal Justice Works Fellowship representing youth in foster care to advocate for their rights. Stephanie parents resettled in Houston in the 1970s as refugees from the Vietnam War. And she is a native Houstonian and attended the University of Texas at Austin, receiving her bachelor's in social work before earning her Juris Doctorate degree at South Texas College of Law. In her spare time, Stephanie can be found spending time with her husband, chasing after their 1-year-old daughter. We would also like to welcome Mr. Scot Moore. He is the administrator of Houston's Homeless Court Program and senior associate with the Coalition for the Homeless. The coalition's mission is to provide leadership in the development of advocacy and coordination of community strategies to prevent and end homelessness. Scott came to the coalition through an internship back in 2004, while he was a transitional program for those living with HIV and experiencing homelessness. Using his lived experiences, he's a fierce and legal advocate for all those experiencing homelessness. So I'll leave the floor open to Anyeti to take it from here.
Okay. Thanks, Regina. And thank you again, Stephanie and Scott, for being with us this Saturday afternoon as part of HYLA's Day of Service. When we initially reached out to the two of you, one thing that this committee in particular wanted to focus on was communities that have been impacted by the pandemic, whose obstacles and challenges have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and we're really just grateful for the two of you for your experience and expertise to talk to us about the Houston's homeless community and how they've been impacted by these challenges, in particular this past year and a half. And so before we get into the sort of mechanics of your respective organizations, the first thing that we thought would be important is to get an understanding about the term homelessness. And all of us have an idea of what it is and what it could look like. But our question is, for lack of a better word, fluidity, I guess isn't the best word, but can homelessness be experienced on a spectrum? Because I imagine you have individuals who, sadly live on the streets every night, and then you may have the person who sort of pings between shelters, including maybe living with family and friends, and then you may have someone who's in like private boarding without security of tenure. So open to either of y'all. Could y'all explain what that spectrum looks like, how homelessness can be experienced on a spectrum? And also, the second part of that question is, for the sake of seeking legal and social services from y'all, what are the metrics that y'all look at for someone who may qualify for your help? Oh, Scott, sorry, you're muted. let's see. Let's
Yeah,
see.
I got it.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there you go. You know, Scott, you're muted. That's so 2020, and I'm still doing it in 21. You know, it's like, oh, you're unmuted. You're unmuted. My apologies on that. I'd like to start with that, and it's a great question because I always forget that others don't understand homelessness, and especially the definition. We at the coalition have to go by a very strict HUD definition, which is the Housing Urban Development. So the Congress came up with a law, and that's a law where you have to be living in a place of not meant for human habitation. That includes everything from under the bridge to in an encampment, in a car, you know, anything in abandoned building or in emergency shelter. That's in order to be housed. Now, what we do through Homeless Court is we've expanded that definition. We are very loose with our homeless definition, and we've actually expanded it to homeless prevention as well. So we've included some programming, which Stephanie can actually talk about because they do reach out to that part of the community. But we use a very loose definition in homelessness in our Homeless Court. We use a loose definition, but it's very strict in order to get it housed.
And I'll just piggyback off of Scott's response and say that, you know, at the Beacon, in order to qualify for our legal services, we are grant funded for the most part, and we go by income guideline restrictions. And so we too have a loose definition of homelessness because we want to serve as broad of a range of clients as possible. And we recognize that there is a spectrum, like you were saying, Anyeti.
And how would I guess terms like episodic homelessness, like chronic homelessness, how would you define those, and how would they fit into the I guess into that sort of gradient understanding of how homelessness can be experienced?
Again, there is a HUD's definition of to be chronic is someone who's been living on the street or in an emergency shelter for 12 or more months, okay, and they have a disabling condition. They have to have both, the length of time and a disabling condition. Everyone else is just anyone who's been experiencing homelessness, even just one day, would qualify for rapid rehousing, but they have to be literally homeless. And then in that chronic definition, you can also have 4 or more episodes of homelessness, which equal 3 years or more, which equal 12 months or more over a 3-year period, plus the disabling condition. So it can be kind of confusing. We really try to, in the public, not to talk about those terms. That's really on our side. This is what we need to understand and know for someone to be chronic. So in other words, if someone's chronic, say they were on the street for 6 months, they go to jail for a year, and then they get out and they're back on the streets, that's one break. That whole year is a break. And there are many people that bounce in and out of homelessness. So that's where you come up with the chronic definition.
And I'll just add, I think that, you know, from the outside perspective, and for me as well, before I started working at the Beacon, you know, the face of homelessness are panhandlers, right? Or people who are visibly homeless, people that you might see lining up in front of the Beacon or a homeless shelter. But I do also want to acknowledge that there really is an invisible population, which are women and children, you know, and they are very vulnerable as well, but it can look different. And to the individual themselves, they might not even identify as homeless. A lot of our homeless youth and young adult population, you know, would not identify, but they're couch surfing. They don't have stable housing. So it really is a diverse population, you know, within the homeless population we're talking about.
That's a great segue to our next question, because Stephanie, you had brought up women, children, and young adults who are impacted by homelessness, and sort of this idea of invisible homelessness. And HYLA, a month to the date, had a program on domestic violence, and a couple of speakers on that CLE panel work with women survivors who have been basically kicked out of their house by their abusive partners. And one thing that Regina and I were interested in learning from the both of you is, when people do come to y'all for services, when you're doing intake or having sort of any initial correspondence with them, do you discuss what variables sort of led to their condition or their sort of transient condition at the time? Do they discuss domestic violence? Is it an influx of evictions currently now? What's going on? So what are some examples of what maybe you frequently come across?
We have a process at the coalition where we have what we call hubs, and anyone that comes into the homeless service system gets an assessment. And my experience is that, and this is unique to Houston because I've traveled everywhere throughout the country, but those in Houston that are seeking services are more than willing to tell you about their mental health, about their physical health, about their domestic violence situation, about all of those questions we do ask, so we can actually assess them and to lead them to the proper housing provider, and also to the proper services. So specifically, besides HIV, domestic violence is really close to my heart, and the only exception for somebody who is staying, how do I say this? If a family is fleeing a domestic violence situation and they come here from Atlanta and they're staying with friends or family, we consider them homeless. Anyone fleeing a domestic violence situation is homeless. Doesn't matter where they end up, they're in a very vulnerable situation. And we do have specific housing providers specific to meet the needs of those fleeing a domestic violence situation.
And we participate in that assessment at the Beacon, but Beacon Law has also a separate legal intake process. And so we're, our primary goal is to identify what the legal need obviously is, and to see if we can meet that need. But obviously sometimes that does relate to their, the trauma that they're experiencing, if they are a survivor or have experienced domestic violence. One such case is, if they are in a situation where their abuser, they have to flee their abuser, but they also have a lease term, that they're obligated under. And so Texas law does allow for pretty narrow requirements when it comes to that. I wouldn't say it's exactly victim friendly, but we have in the past like helped somebody be able to, break their lease legally.
Yeah, going off of that, Stephanie, you're speaking about the legal needs and things like that these victims, the homeless individuals need. What are some of the common legal needs or issues that, that these individuals are confronted with? And I think that question goes to you as well as Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Beacon Law, we primarily assist with ID restoration. And what that means is there is a legal barrier preventing you from just walking into a DPS office and getting your ID or driver's license. So a lot of times that means that it's an outstanding Class C ticket or warrant in Texas that has placed a hold on your driver's license because you haven't, appeared in court, you haven't paid your ticket, so on and so forth. And so millions of Texans are affected by this. It really is not a situation that is particular to the homeless population, but it impacts the population disproportionately. So that is a lot of what we do. That's about 40%. The other 40% is called clearing criminal history. So in the state of Texas, you can either do that through an expunction or a non-disclosure. We actually have a lot of pro bono attorneys helping out with expunctions because they are pro bono friendly. But that is so that we can remove those barriers and increase access to employment and housing, which is our ultimate goal. And then we also do a little bit of everything else within civil legal aid. But I would say another robust component of our program is access to public benefits. Our clients who are disabled and not unable to work, we want to fast track them in order to get access to Social Security benefits.
And I have to say the majority of the clients we serve do not have an ID or a driver's license. It's either been lost, stolen, taken, or whatever. They do not have it. And if you don't have a driver's license or an ID in the state of Texas, you can't even get into an emergency shelter, much less sign a lease or find employment. So that is our number one reason why we came up with the homeless court process, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, well, going into that, the homeless court, process. Scott, can you just tell us more about the history of the homeless court, more about like how the docket is organized, what's the procedures are like?
I'm always willing to talk about homeless court. It was about, okay, so all of our service providers got together about 16 years ago, and they heard about this homeless court, which actually started in San Diego at a stand down. And they're still running. That homeless court is still running. I still keep in touch with them. But they got together and they said, hey, this is a huge problem for us in Houston, much less, through the state of Texas, but specifically here in Houston. How are we going to do this? Well, we at the coalition, we don't do any direct client service. So we're the umbrella. All of our agencies are our clients. So it's kind of like a really good fit. When my boss told me, she said, I want you to attend this meeting. I said, what is this meeting about? I don't know. What's the topic? I don't know. What do I do? She goes, do whatever they say. And they were trying to develop a homeless court. I am not an attorney and I'm not a judge. I do have lived experience on the streets, and I do have lived experience in and out of the criminal system. So when I got in there and said, oh my God, homeless court. Anyways, the way the process goes is that all I do, if we've got a referral packet, it's on our website. If you go to homelesshouston.org, visit the homeless court page. And at the end of all the verbiage, there's a referral packet. The only way you can get on the homeless court docket is through a referral from a caseworker or a mentor or someone that is assisting you to help you exit homelessness. It has to come from that caseworker. All I do is gather the names and submit names to the courts. They compile the docket, and then literally all I'm doing is handing them the names. But the reason why they have to come from a referral has to come from a caseworker is because judge will give community service for the monies that they owe. But we define, this is the only thing that's different in the homeless court docket, is that we define community service as their work or participation in the program that they've already completed, or they're in the middle of actively working their program. So that's why the referral must come from a caseworker. They can't do it themselves, can't come from anyone else, just from a caseworker. Once we go to court, which by the way is the first, second, and third Wednesday of every month down at the municipal courts at 1400 Lubbock. It's an open docket. You're more than willing to come and participate and just observe. Of course, we're doing the COVID protocol. But once we get to court, I hand them their little piece of paper, which is their community service interview log. They just sign it. They hand it to the judge. The judges that we have are 3, and they rotate. And they're not very punitive. They're very open and understanding. They do treat our clients special. Like they address the court and they say, hey, we understand that how hard it is for you to work a program and actually exit homelessness. So what we're going to do today is we're going to clear off all your cases today, and you'll walk out of here owing nothing. No one believes When I tell them that, no one believes me until they hear it from the judge and until they see their orders of dismissal that they owe nothing. And inevitably, in any docket, someone ends up crying, someone ends up going, you can tell they walk into court with their shoulders down and they're just like very, very frightened. And once they get that piece of paper, they stand up, they smile, and then they're free to go. So that's the process in a nutshell, not to get too technical.
And I will share my perspective as a referral agency to homeless court. First off, I just want to say we are the biggest fans of City of Houston Homeless Court. And one of the reasons is because Scott Moore runs it. As the coordinator for homeless court, you know, and I've been referring clients for over 4 years now. You know, as my role in program director, I am a little bit more removed from the process now, but I will just say that it's the best homeless court, you know, in the state of Texas. I'm not biased by saying that. Like we work all over the state of Texas to try and clear people's tickets, outstanding tickets and warrants. And the City of Houston Homeless Court is the most streamlined, most efficient, in my opinion. And the most important thing to me is those dismissals, because at the end of the day, a lot of people don't know this, there are collateral consequences to you getting a conviction for a Class C misdemeanor, Class C a driving violation. And it affects your driver's license to the point where it might be suspended, you might not be able to drive, you might have to get special insurance. There are all of these hoops that our clients have to jump through, even when we clear their tickets. And so that dismissal is huge at the end of the day. And I will also say that I really feel like, you know, homeless court is designed to meet people where they are. Like Scott said, the judges don't have a punitive, you know, model. It really is about, you know, I would even say, you know, go so far as say, like, I feel like it takes into account people's trauma. And because a lot of times we encounter courts that want to feel like there is some type of skin in the game, you know, for lack of a better phrase, for the client. But they have gone through so much to get to where they are, you know, to even ask for help from us. So, the homeless court is very low barrier, and that's really important when it comes to our clients, because at this point they don't trust the system at all. They've been burned way too many times. And so like Scott said, you know, people walk out of there crying because for the very first time something has worked in their favor. And so again, we're just huge fans.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I will add to that, my time in court, I'm there at 4 o'clock sharp for every docket for the past 16 years. And the reason why in my purpose there is that we decided not to have a bailiff in the courtroom in uniform. And we found that that was very important, because that uniform does trigger a lot of our clients, whether they have mental illness or substance abuse or whatever the reason, or with the background. But I'm there basically as their bailiff, even though I do not work for the courts and I am not in uniform. And when I address the court, when I address the clients, I upfront say, hey, my name is Scott Moore. I work for the Coalition for the Homeless. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a judge. And I know nothing about your tickets. But what I do know is that you're going to walk out of here owing nothing today, and take it from there. And in the past years, I think I've only had to turn away 3 clients. One, she was so, and this is recent, she was so drunk or high or whatever, that 2 bailiffs had to like carry her in the courtroom. And I just looked at him, I said, I'll take care of this. And I said, Miss So-and-so, you really need to show up sober. And two others, they literally passed out before they got to the judge. And one of them, I woke him up and he goes, oh, is it over? Is it over? I said, yes, it's over. Let me talk to you outside. But other than that, we've had no problems, none whatsoever with clients.
I appreciate y'all bringing up the issue of this particular community having triggering experiences within a courtroom, and y'all talking about sort of the presence of, that uniform presence, that authoritarian presence, because the other sort of component to what y'all do, before I ping it to Regina for the last question, is what y'all's interactions are with our local law enforcement, and what role our police play into sort of, for lack of a better word, monitoring the community, the homeless community, working with y'all, and also what your clients' experiences have been like interacting with police, because that could be incredibly triggering for a number of communities, but for them in particular, when people might be looking at them with a biased lens as to why they are experiencing homelessness now, etc. So I was wondering if either of y'all could share your thoughts on your clients' interactions with police, and maybe how your work has helped law enforcement have a better understanding of what these people are experiencing.
I would like to give a huge shout out to HPD's homeless outreach team, which we call the HOT team. They came about, I believe, as a result of the work that we were doing in the homeless court, because they recognized that, hey, we have this just by the blue uniform. We want to be compassionate. And they do really good work with trying to gain the trust of those out in the community. However, the backside of that is that because we've housed so many people and we're so successful, those that are on the streets right now, we just closed down an encampment and over on Allen Parkway. There were 57 people living in that encampment. And out of the 57, 3/4 had really serious warrants. We did end up housing them, but my experience is that, okay, even though it's the homeless outreach team, they still pull up in a police car, they still in uniform, and we literally saw them scatter. I mean, it's like, wait a minute, we're trying to house them, so we had to have that conversation with them. Please just don't show up when we're trying to house people on the street, because then we lose them. So there still is that issue. But however, I will also say this too. When we first started doing homeless court, the only thing the police officers knew how to do is just throw tickets. I mean, we would have tens of thousands of dollars. It was not unheard of to have hundreds and hundreds of tickets, which they would never end up paying or never can be able to sit out in jail. We don't see that anymore. We don't see HPD just throwing tickets at them. But I do know officers that are saying, hey, I have to give you this ticket, but here's the way you can resolve it. Go to the Beacon, go to a shelter, get access to homeless court. And also, one last thing, the HOT team also just recently started referring their own clients to homeless court. So the police officers are actually making their own referrals. So we have some really good cops out there, and then some that just don't understand the clients that they're serving.
I don't think I have too much to add to that. I definitely agree with everything Scott said. I'll just say that, also a fan of the HOT team. I think the reality is we're living in an age where there's a lot of fear around law enforcement, and that, that fear is not unfounded. And so I do also just feel like it's important for us to listen to our clients and not kind of write their experiences off when they're talking about encounters with law enforcement. And it's frustrating, kind of just hearing it and feeling like there's not much, that can be done. A lot of times we just kind of advise them that there is, an internal review system within law enforcement departments, and it really is about establishing more trust in the community, like Scott said. So I feel like we're, on a positive path. There's always room for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you guys for that. My last question is, we're living in this COVID era right now, and what are some of the health protection strategies that the homeless shelters have employed for their staff? And kind of what are the homeless support spaces related to, what's the dialogue about the vaccines, You know, is there anything that's going on with that? And how are you guys, you know, involved with that?
In the beginning, we scrambled and we, you know, just like everyone else, we locked down and say, we don't know what to do. But what we did is we ended up, and thank goodness we live in Houston and we have the city of Houston and the county judge, they work together. And between them, we at the coalition has received $65 million through COVID funding, which is channeling out to our service providers to house 5,000 people in the next 2 years. So that's a positive. Second thing we did when COVID started is we opened up what we called the COVID hotel. It was an undisclosed hotel where if anyone on the street or an emergency shelter showed symptoms, they could go to that hotel, get tested, and quarantine. And it was staffed with medical services. All of our emergency shelters had to go to half capacity. So we literally opened up extra emergency shelters so they would take 50% of their population and move them to another location. They did all the distancing. The best part about this COVID and what we have done in the homeless response system is that we actually tested everyone in shelter, not just once, not just twice, but they went through rigorous testing. And now the best part is that we're vaccinating them. Since the Johnson & Johnson came out, all of our homeless clients that are coming through the shelter are getting vaccine. And the good news is all of the 21,000 that we already have housed in homelessness, we're working on getting them vaccinated as well. So those that are in our PSH and rapid rehousing programs, we're getting them vaccinated. So there's a lot of good news. If you notice, people would say, hey, it looks like homelessness is on the rise in Houston, especially in the downtown area. It's not true, it's the same. It's just that there aren't the workers that are on the downtown street where you don't see them. They're just more visible on the street. So it's a good thing. Our street population are grouping up in encampments, and they're going by the distancing protocols. They're very serious about they're not serious about wearing masks, though. When we closed down that encampment, I noticed that we all had masks on. We're doing the lotion, but none of them were. But they're outside. They're safer outside. We thought at the beginning that the homeless population would be more vulnerable. We are not more vulnerable because of COVID, because they're outside on the street.
And I'll just share quickly what the Beacon has done. You know, we have, you know, followed CDC guidelines, and we have protocols when you enter the building. We also, you know, so we have Healthcare for the Homeless, a partnership with them. There's a clinic on site. So they have been helping out with vaccinations. And I believe that there's an upcoming drive as well. And we also have made it priority to allow access or give access to frontline staff. And so all around, I would say, yeah, things are definitely looking up, and definitely we had a few scares here and there, but nothing too serious. And so we've been able to stay open. We even expanded our hours at one point. But currently we are still at a maximum capacity of 90 clients per day. And then we also try to keep track of who's coming in, and so that we make space for others who may have not, you know, we have not seen for a while. So we're trying to accommodate as best as we can, and just, you know, abiding by CDC guidelines as they continue to be updated.
Great. Oh, thank you all so much. This subject matter, I know this was very quick and only a half an hour, but this is something that quite frankly like needs its own summit. And I mean, thank you for this like sort of mini primer on this important subject, and all sort of interesting intersectional issues that arise. And I know I speak for Regina and our entire organization, just thanking you, Stephanie and Scott, for your work. We know that it's a lot of work. There's a lot of sacrifice in time, and with the storm that happened just a couple months ago, I know that amplified the work as well. So truly, thank you for what you all do and for sharing your heart and your education and expertise with us this afternoon and spending your Saturday with us. Before we let y'all go, oh yeah, before we let y'all go, are y'all okay with me taking a picture,
Mhm.
a screenshot?
Sure.
Photo? Okay, awesome. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Thank you. And Regina shared the course number in the chat. Stephanie will get that email to you after we leave today. And thank you all for being part of our day of service, our last day of service of the bar year. And let us know how HYLA can support both the Beacon and Homeless Court. So I hope you all have a great weekend. Today is Scott's birthday, so happy birthday, Scott.
Happy
Thanks for spending your birthday.
Yay.
So now go enjoy your birthday.
Thank you. Thank you
And
for moving the
yes.
time.
Yo, no problem, no problem. Y'all
Thanks for
take
having
care.
me.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.